good, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome to the Waterstone 2021 Political Predictions Podcast. I'm your host, editor of the Daily Blog, Martyn Bradbury. With me in the studio is libertarian political commentator and stuff columnist Damien Grant. And joining us via phone is our special guest, leader of the ACT Party, David Seymour. Welcome, David.
Hey, look, thanks. Why is it by phone? Is it, you think I got COVID or something?
We're happy to do it in person.
We're happy to do it in person, but
I mean, you.
It's okay. I understand.
No. You name the time and place, and we'll be there.
What will the next year hold for our political parties, and what will be the big domestic and international economic issues, COVID predictions, geopolitical predictions, and what possible curveball predictions might also occur? Damien, what predictions do you have for Labour in 2021?
Well, at the start of this year, I made 3 predictions.
Yes.
I predicted a recession.
Yes.
I got that one right. I predicted Trump would lose.
Yes.
I got that one right. I predicted Simon Bridges would be Prime Minister.
Not so good.
So two out of 3 isn't bad.
Yep.
I'm going to predict that the virus will eventually burn itself out overseas.
Yes.
And New Zealand will face itself in a increasing quandary as a isolated little bubble of puritanical goodliness, frightened about the rest of the world. We'll be like North Sentinel Island, pathetic and tragic.
Dave, that's great. No actual predictions for Labour, though, in that.
Well, Labour are going to have to work out what to do with it, and Labour are completely and utterly bereft of ideas. They won't know what to do with it. They will continue to print money because, let's face it, Adrian Orr is not an independent central banker. Adrian Orr is in the tank for the Labour Party.
Is he a member of the Communist Party? Adrian Orr?
Adrian Orr is a contemptible and utter disgrace. He has failed.
Captain Socialism.
He has failed to uphold the legacy of the 1989 Central Bank Act. And so my prediction for Labour is that Adrian Orr will continue his recklessness and Grant Robertson will continue to spend printed money.
David, what predictions for Labour in 2021?
I think Labour are going to have a real problem with the size of that caucus, because you can already see the way that they're throwing their weight around.
Yes.
There's no uniting enemy. I mean, it used to be easy. You just say, look, do you guys really want to lose to Winston? If you don't hang together, you'll hang separately. Now you've got all these different factions. In a sense, it's a coalition between the Maori MPs and the rest.
Yes.
The Maori MPs are facing renewed competition because voting for the Maori Party is now a real option in the Maori electorate.
Yes.
And then you're going to have issues like water. So that kind of factionalism is going to be difficult. And you're going to have some difficult issues. For example, is it right that a child should be put in a more dangerous environment for their physical safety?
Absolutely.
Than otherwise be.
Absolutely.
On cultural lines. So
yes.
You can see that. You can see water, and no doubt things we can't predict. So the factionalism will be difficult. I think the other problem they've got is that government ultimately is a service industry.
Yes.
And they are hopeless at delivering. You look at housing, you look at transport, you look at COVID, they appear to have done well. But as the Jacinda Ardern puppet said in the spitting image,
yes.
Do you realise how hard it is to isolate 2 highly isolated islands? The question is, will people get frustrated at the lack of delivery? And of course, one of the big questions is, can this monetary policy thing that's happening continue? Because if someone said to me, can I borrow $100 for a year? I'll pay you back 25 cents interest at the end of the year. You'd probably tell them to get stuffed. Well, that's what the New Zealand government's doing.
Yes.
$1 billion every 3 days. And somehow people are buying it. Well, I don't know enough about what's happening with monetary policy these days. I'm not sure anyone does. But it just doesn't seem sustainable. So there's a few houses of cards that could come down.
Can we come back to the Maori caucus for a second, David? Do you get the sense that there is any underlying ideological difference between the Maori caucus and the non-Maori caucus inside Labour? Is it just Maori and non-Maori, or are there ideological left-right splits that may actually separate part of the Maori caucus from the rest?
Well, it depends who. Willie Jackson's former Alliance guy, pretty hard left. On the other hand, a guy like Tieni Henare is probably quite centrist, and the Ngāi Mahuta, she's pretty sensible from everything I've seen from her. But I think the real issue is that they're going to have a Maori party that's going to be in Parliament every day. They respect the tikanga on the marae, but for some reason they won't respect the tikanga of Te Whare Paramate. So there's going to be an element in the Maori electorate saying, well, you guys are sellouts. These Maori Party guys are sticking up for us, and that's going to make them nervous. So I think, regardless of the ideology, they're going to have to be, on their toes, not to lose another 3 or 4 seats. And losing a seat can focus a politician, make them very nervous.
Yep. My predictions for Labour, and David seems to have read my bloody notes, the caucus factions will act more like they did under Michael Joseph Savage, in that they will drag a reluctant centrist Labour leader to the left. I think you'll see a lot more of that. And in terms of the delivery, you're absolutely right, David, there will be a frustration, but my guess and my feel and my gut says that the COVID globally is still going to be such a rampant bloody problem, particularly in America, with Trump just seeming to walk away from the issue, that the ongoing turmoil that you'll see overseas, because it's not here, as long as it keeps out of the country, people will forgive the lack of any real domestic bloody policy moves and gains. That's my call there.
Until their job's gone and the value of the benefit keeps diminishing.
Well, that's right. But
if you listen to the speech from the throne,
yes,
which I was forced to, there were basically 3 things in it. Number one, it's a very big, scary world out there.
Yes.
And, of course, all epidemics end one of 2 ways. Either the virus itself dies out, or people just stop caring and move on because they've adjusted their sort of threshold for accepting it. Number 2 is, we are going to go to war on anything that's vaguely emitting of carbon. So there are different boilers, different cars, all that sort of thing. That was quite a theme. And number 3, it's got far too hard to talk about productivity or real results, but we can always make up new metrics in the form of well-being. And you hear this so often when it comes to housing. They say, there's so many tools. When it comes to child poverty, there's so many measures. So, that obfuscation is, I think, a real problem. But if you go back to the start, the bet is people are going to keep being scared of COVID.
Yes.
And of course, it's quite possible that in a year's time, there'll be a vaccine.
Yes.
People will be over it. The virus will actually naturally die out. Who knows? But once that happens, they've got a big hole in their 3-pronged strategy.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. Once that vaccine kicks in, but we're not going to see herd immunity from a vaccine that is widespread until, at beginning of 2022?
And also, I think there's going to be a fair degree of resistance initially in taking a vaccine.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, if I lived in somewhere like New York or wherever where there was a high, then I might be tempted to take it. But if I'm living in New Zealand,
wouldn't you wait?
I'd just,
Yeah. Well, hold on, we'll get to the COVID in a moment. Damien, what predictions for National in 2021?
I'm going to say that Judith Collins is going to surprise us.
Okay, how?
By not being completely useless.
Oh, that would be a surprise. That would be an enormous surprise.
Yes.
That would be something I wasn't expecting.
I think she's handled the defeat well.
Well, compared to Trump, yes.
Yes. There doesn't appear to be...
That's the standard now.
Yeah, that's the standard. That is the standard, yeah.
From an outsider looking in, I think she's handling herself with a bit of dignity. I don't like the split of the Treasury and Minister of Finance nonsense. Andrew Bailey doesn't seem to be a complete muppet.
Yes.
Which, again, strikes me as a little bit of a surprise.
Yes.
I still don't think he's good as Paul Goldsmith, but then Paul Goldsmith can't count. So
Nobody is.
That's right. Nobody is as good.
Nobody is. So I think that we might be surprised by Judith. That's my prediction.
David, predictions for National in 2021?
Oh, look, I wish them all the best, but I think that they have quite a lot to digest. They have to come up with a unified position and a purpose and a reason for being. And, it's pretty hard to do when you've got a highly united organisation because the world out there is pretty changeable. When you've got your sort of fundamentalist Christian faction on the one hand, you've got your sort of, more lefty faction, and then you've got your rural and your urban and people. I mean, of course, adding to all those natural cleavages, you've got people that strongly like and dislike different personalities, and that, I think the story of the Nats, if they're going to be successful, will be overcoming some of those challenges and ultimately finding something to believe in.
My predictions for National are continued leadership instability, and that Judith is unstable. And National will continue, I think, bleeding support to ACT. I just don't see National gaining any of the people who have gone over to Labour, and I don't see them winning anyone back from ACT because fundamentally, as you pointed out, David, they ideologically don't seem to stand for anything other than keeping Labour out of power, and that's just not good enough anymore.
But if David is correct, and you're correct, that the Labour Party starts to appear to be disunited with its internal factions, then, because one of the things that crucified National was its disunity. Particularly, I think Judith Collins said that the Melissa Lee email was worth 1 or 2% or 3% or whatever it was. So I think we can expect to see, or if you're right and there's disunity inside Labour, then some of those 400,000 National Party voters will come home just by default.
Damien, what predictions for Greens in 2021?
Constant frustration at their impotence.
David, predictions for Greens in 2021?
Oh, not good. I mean, you've got poor old Chloe who's gone and won the seat, and she's going to be, helping real people in the real world every day with the failings of government. Meanwhile, you've got this complete madman in the form of Ricardo Menendez March who thinks that the world should be communist.
We all do.
And well, he's one that is serious though.
Is he actually a communist?
He's a Marxist. It's a big difference.
Marxist. Okay, fine, but so that's going to be a real challenge for them at those two extremes. Then they've got the problem that they've taken these ministerial portfolios.
Baubles.
Ostensibly, so Mara, as far as I can see, just so Marama can be a minister.
Yes.
Well, there's no real power. I mean, there's ministers that are in charge of a department, and then there's ministers who shouldn't be ministers. And they are the type of ministers that, with the exception of James Shaw and the Climate Commission, which I guess is a department of sorts, they don't actually have any real power, but of course they can't criticise the government on the issues most of the time, and they have to justify the government's decisions under collective responsibility.
Well, this is one of the things. This is one of the things we were talking about previously, where you had kept some distance between National, both when they were in government and the last 3 years when they were out, and quite fearless in your condemnation. The slogan 119 to 1, I think, became quite iconic. And that drawing a distinction between the minor party and its big brother, if you like, I think was part of what created the opportunity for National Party voters to say, well, actually, ACT represents something different there. That becomes very difficult for the Greens, doesn't it? Because it's very difficult for them to criticise the government.
Well, it depends which Greens. I mean, on the one hand,
true.
Some of them will very happily. I mean, you see, just as we're talking today, Chloe's foremost on quite a vicious attack on the Prime Minister.
Yeah, she did.
And yet, of course, the others who are in the cabinet, or at least in the ministry, and talking to the Labour people every day, will be saying, oh, can you just tone that down a bit? I've got to keep my job and my salary. And they'll be saying, well, screw you, why do you get the big salary? So, you're not even achieving anything. So, look, it just absolutely mystifies me why they took those positions. I can't believe it.
And Swarbrick.
Julian Genter and Eugenie Sage feel they've just taken a 100,000 pay cut.
Yeah.
For what?
My prediction for the Greens is that they won't be able to help themselves and will embark upon a woke free speech purge and will want to include religion and gender identity in hate speech legislation. And that, I think, is only going to serve to help ACT. Their inability to get anything meaningful through on the environment or on welfare or on inequality will just disillusion Green voters. They're going to have a real challenge holding that percentage.
But let me just say, I did predict earlier in the year at many different public meetings that the Greens wouldn't make it. They did.
Yes.
The first party to make it against the odds of being a party that had been in government for 3 years as a minor party, and they did it while their natural complementary party was at an all-time high.
Yes.
So, despite all of that, I do have to give some credit where it's due.
You see, I think there's an interesting dynamic where the leadership of the party goes to Chloe and says, can you tone it down? And Chloe says, I won an electorate seat.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
I have the mana.
I've got the mandate. You don't.
To say what I want to do and what are you going to do. You can't fire me.
Right.
You can't discipline me. If anything, the Swarbrick brand has
It's
a
stronger.
cachet of its own.
Right.
So, yeah, it's like when the sales rep earns more than the managing director does. I
You
think
know how
that's,
that feels. Damien,
yeah.
what prediction for ACT in 2021?
Well, as again saying before, I think a lot depends on how well David does in corralling, educating, disciplining his team. If that team, because what I've been hearing and what I've been reading is that David has done quite a good job of getting his team up to speed.
Yes.
I understand you had Richard Prebble in there reading them the
Right
issues. Yep. and so long as there are no Heather Royers or David Garretts, I think ACT are going to have a pretty good couple of years.
David, predictions for ACT in 2021?
Yeah, Damien's about right. I mean, it's all about culture. So, I ran into the CEO of a pretty big listed company, and this person said to me, oh, it's going to be pretty tough. I said, look, imagine if your company could start its culture from square one. Wouldn't that be a great opportunity? And they said, yep, you probably would be. The flip side of that is that, we are starting from scratch. So a big part of the job is just getting a bunch of people who, are normal, have had real jobs and careers and run businesses and stuff. All of a sudden they're in this big room with a bunch of other, borderline psychopaths that were also crazy enough to sign a nomination form. And they've got to operate and perform pretty much from day one. So that's our challenge, but I actually think it's also a huge opportunity. And I think, some people say, oh, well, politics is cyclical, it'll all go back to the way it was. Most of the time that's true. Politics is usually cyclical, but every now and then there's a step change. And the proposition from ACT is that we no longer have real rational debate about the future of our country. We let these problems, the housing market, or more specifically, the ability to develop your own property without being drowned in bureaucracy, has grown up over 2 decades under 3 governments of both stripes. And ACT is the one that actually comes along and speaks truth to power. And I think that there's a huge opportunity there for people who want to use not just property for development of homes, but also for their farms, also in the energy and resources space. People who basically want to make a difference in their own lives are going to say, well, who's speaking for us? And the answer is ACT.
So, David, the reading list for the MPs, what have you got them reading over the Christmas break? H.L. Mencken, Road to Serfdom. I've been thinking, what are you allocating to the guys and girls?
Well, kind
Ayn
of.
Rand, Atlas Shrugged.
No, it kind of depends on. So everyone's got their own plan based on their own particular skills and where they need to go and what they need to develop. So it varies, but a bit of hype never goes amiss, and a bit of practical stuff too about speaking in media and all the rest. And then of course they've all got specific homework in their policy areas. So there's a lot going on.
My predictions for ACT is that they will continue in 2021, and they'll continue to be seen as the right-wing values party, and they will continue to cannibalise National Party vote. And I think, to be honest, David, your leadership of ACT post-election and the way you have brought your MPs together, put them through a sort of a post-election academy. You've gone on a tour around the country and said thank you to all of your supporters. You have sounded credible. You have come across as the de facto leader of the opposition. I agree with you. I don't think this is going to be a cyclic situation where those voters, you lose voters back to National. I think that a generation change is in shift right now, and that National are going to be on the receiving end, losing votes to you. I think that the 2021 story will be ACT polling at double figures. I'm telling you now, Damien. You don't believe me.
No, I want to believe you. That would make me so happy.
Damien, what predictions for the Māori Party in 2021?
I don't think much will happen, actually. I think that they will make some noise and they will struggle to get traction. I think we're not going to hear a lot about them until we get closer to 2023. And I think in 2023 they stand a good stead of getting a breakout. But I don't see them getting much coverage.
David, predictions of the Māori Party in 2021?
Well, as I said a bit earlier, the best thing I've read, it's not my original, but someone said, look, they respect tikanga on the marae. Why won't they respect the tikanga of Parliament? Their behaviour has just been cringeworthy so far. I think a lot of it actually comes from nervousness. It's a real shock entering Parliament, and I suspect they'll look back in 6 months and be a bit embarrassed at the way that they carried themselves in their first couple of weeks. But, the problem is that voters aren't stupid. I mean, the theatrics are one thing, but ultimately voters want people that have a track record or at least show credible potential to make their lives better. So if you're sitting there as a voter in a Maori electorate, you're saying, okay, well, these guys make lots of noise and they stand up and say that they're, all for tangata whenua and all the rest. But actually, they're going to raise productivity. They're going to make it easier to build homes. They're going to get us better education. Those are the things that really matter. But I think that they're going to make enough noise to give the Maori MPs and Labour a hell of a fright.
My prediction for the Māori Party is that they will continue to be able to criticise government social policy and embarrass them in a way that the Greens can't. There is enormous anger within Māoridom at the lack of sovereignty in issues like health, and issues like housing, and issues like education. That frustration is boiling over. If the Māori caucus inside the Labour Party can't show real bloody gains in terms of taking money out of government departments and handing it directly to those Māori organisations, if they don't make real gains, the Māori Party is gonna make hay off that. I think there's a real problem for the Labour Party on that front, and I think the Māori Party can articulate it. Damien, let's get into the big issues for 2021. Big domestic economic issue in 2021. What is it going to be?
Tourism.
Why?
Because we don't have any. I mean, tourism is 8% of our GDP.
Yep.
So domestic tourism might pick up, 2% of that or whatever.
Yep.
But you're talking about the destruction of something like 4 to 6% of our GDP, and that is on the medium-term basis. That's a problem.
Stuart Nash banning Freedom Campers, is it going to be enough?
Nobody cares. That is probably the biggest single act of wealth destruction that we've seen during this COVID thing, because that's not something that can be easily replicated.
Right.
I mean, Fonterra is continuing to export, so that sort of stuff can continue. It's people coming to our shores and spending
4
money.
4 million a year, right? 4 million people a year not coming.
And they're not coming, and that's going to hurt, and that's going to have a ramification, regardless of how much money Adrian or prints.
David, big domestic economic issues in 2021. What's it going to be for New Zealand?
Yeah, it's can the real economy keep up with the nominal economy? So, Damien points to tourism has stopped. Well, that's 4 million people coming here and actually bringing money that have stopped. But it's also your export education.
Yes.
It's also
migrant workers.
It's your workers. It's a lot of businesses where ultimately you just got to eyeball people. And I think New Zealand, someone said earlier in this podcast, is going to find itself in a conundrum if the rest of the world starts to move on one way with or without a vaccine. So, the real economy, you have to say, has shrunk in terms of real activity.
Yeah.
And yet, maybe terms of trade have gone up a bit, milk prices up a bit, sure. Truck ultimately seems to be up, but it doesn't seem that is sustainable.
Yeah.
It seems that it is driven by monetary policy, and that just can't be sustainable. At some point, you've got to either get inflation spreading from asset prices to other prices,
Yes.
or you end up with the asset prices bursting because people basically lose confidence in the New Zealand dollar the way we've carried on. And then you have a real big problem. But having said that, Adrian Orr is either a genius or insane. I don't know which. And it may be that actually you can just print an extra 100 billion, have funding for lending and large-scale asset purchases, and at the end of it, everyone just moves on. Happy to be proven wrong, but I'm just not so sure I will be.
I think the big domestic economic issues for 2021 for New Zealand are going to be housing, plus jobs. I think you're absolutely right. I think tourism is going to take such a bloody hit. Our numbers of jobless, I can't see how they're not going to go up. If you've lost 4 million people from your economy visiting, that's almost the entire population of the country. That is going to have massive ramifications.
And when it really starts to bite. So at the moment we keep giving money to people, right? And so there's people getting welfare and other bits and pieces. Where it gets really hard, if you're currently getting, say, $400 a week from welfare, whatever, that's your allocation, and over time that 400 just, the earning power, the purchasing power of that 400 just starts to slip and slip and slip and slip.
Yep.
That's when it gets really tight and really hungry, and no amount of prime ministerial hugs is going to solve that conundrum.
But it's kindness. Damien, big international economic issues in 2021. What are they going to be overseas?
Joe Biden restarting the wars. We're going back to Iraq. We're going back to Afghanistan. We're going to start bombing, baby. We got the drones coming back, the military-industrial complex. Here it comes. Eisenhower, you were right. Joe Biden and the drones. It's on, baby. Let's go.
David, big international economic issues in 2021?
Look, I think Damien may be right about that, but I think for us it's China. If you look at the saber rattling with Australia, and we say, well, that's a bit silly, those Aussies. Just remember, our defence policy is that any attack on Australia is an attack on New Zealand.
Yes.
The CCP is frankly an evil regime. They are basically just annexed Hong Kong.
Yes.
Taiwan maybe next, but as you say, Big Joe, the new sheriff's in town, so that gets messy. But the saber rattling with the Aussies is really quite terrifying.
Yes.
And I don't think that we can remain isolated from that forever. So we're going to have some real challenges, and it may very quickly turn out to be the issue that makes every other issue we talk about seem absolutely trivial. People say, bugger it, build as many houses as you want. We got real problems here.
We don't actually have an alliance, a military alliance with Australia at the moment, do we? Five Eyes is not a military alliance, and ANZUS is dead.
Well, certainly in our latest defence white paper, it's very clear that our military policy is to view an attack on Australia as
an attack on us, the big international economic issue of 2021, I think, is going to be the impact of climate change on the economies around the world. I think an increase in storms. I think an increase in droughts. I think an increase of a heating super planet is going to make certain parts of the world just not possible to do business in. Damien, COVID predictions 2021.
It'll burn itself out. People are already starting to get over it.
David, COVID predictions 2021?
Yeah, look, you look at the US, the news tonight, 1 million people passed through US airports for their holiday season. And yet this is at a time when infections are at a record high.
Yes.
I think, that basically it's the second way that an epidemic dies out, is that people adjust their appetite for risk and their threshold for safety, and they basically say, yep, so some people are dying. but we have decided to alter our calculation. New Zealand is an outlier in the calculation that we've made, where we've said we're prepared to pay far more to avoid deaths from COVID than we are prepared to spend when it comes to making roads safer or funding pharmaceuticals. And at some point, I think that is going to have to be, I guess, rationalised, and it's going to be a very, very difficult debate for the country to have.
My COVID prediction: we won't see herd immunity until the vaccine is completely widely available. People won't take it, as you suggested, first off. They'll wait and see, well, let's just make sure that it's a good dose. I don't see...
No, it's going to be safe because the Chinese are going to test it on the Uyghurs.
Yeah, I don't see it. Right, exactly. I cannot see the borders reopening and us getting back to any level of normalcy until the end of 2022. That's what the Treasury predicted, and I think that they're on the money. I don't think that people, particularly with the spike we're about to see in America and in Europe, I think that it's not going to happen until you get the vaccine all rolled out, and that's going to be a truncated economy until 2022. Damien, geopolitical predictions, 2021.
Same as what I said before. I think that the return of Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is surrounding himself with some of, or many of, Obama's foreign policy hawks. I think that is a retrograde step. I think we are going to see a much more muscular US foreign policy, and you are going to see a muscular US foreign policy at the same time as that they are in terminal economic decline. That is a huge risk, and you contrast that, as David said, with a resurgent China that is politically stable, at least for the time being, and is economically and militarily on the resurgence. It's going to be ugly.
David, geopolitical predictions?
Well, it's the same as my economic prediction. I guess it's China.
Yep.
I just don't know how this ends well. You just have to hope that actually there's a level of rationality in Beijing, and that they are prepared to say, look, we don't want to go a step further. And in fairness, the Chinese have been many things throughout their history, but they've never been particularly imperialistic.
Yes.
So that's probably actually the best hope. The second best hope is a much stronger alliance of democratic or at least freer nations around the Pacific Rim who have interests in common with New Zealand that prevent them from exercising some of the overwhelming power that they seem to be assembling.
My geopolitical predictions in 2021, all eyes on the Georgia Senate election on January the 6th. That will reshape and allow Biden to be able to have more domestic policy if the Democrats do win. I think Trump is going to continue to be a worry right up until January 2020 on whether or not he actually does launch a military attack against Iran. I think you've got a group within the White House who are bloody driving it, and the Israelis seem very bloody keen. So let's not rule that out.
Absolutely, we can rule it out. But Trump is an isolationist.
Yeah, but this is his last moment. Will he go with a bang? Will he go with a whimper? I say that he's crazy enough to go with a bang. Biden will face a huge influx of migrants over the southern border. You're already seeing that happening from parts of South America that have been repeatedly hit by storms. There's a huge surge of people moving north.
The wall.
That will be.
Trump build a wall?
There's no wall. Putin stepping down, I think, has got a real issue of a power vacuum in Russia, and I think also, David, you're absolutely right. China. Will they take Hong Kong and completely seize it and then try Taiwan on and then stand back and say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I don't think the world's going to do anything.
It'd be like Crimea.
Damien, curveball prediction. What could happen that will reshape everything?
Biden dies or is removed from office for dementia, and Kamala Harris steps up.
David, curveball prediction. Change everything in 2021.
Oh, just a total collapse of faith in currency after 12 years of QE and trashing the currencies. People start to lose faith in their own currencies, and you suddenly get a scramble to find some sort of safe haven.
Yes.
And it could be absolute crisis of confidence and global turmoil.
And what do you think that safe haven would be? I mean, my prediction would be gold, but gold's not
Bitcoin?
very... Bitcoin doesn't work.
Well,
as a
but
currency.
those are the two that occurred to me. I mean, in New Zealand, it's bungalows.
Airbnbs.
You see, so the people who are currently getting heavily into debt to buy property, if that happens, will actually do really well. Because you own a real asset denominated in a nominal debt in a fiat currency that's tanking. There's a massive opportunity for a transfer of wealth, and it's going to be really ugly.
My curveball prediction for 2021 that changes everything. I hate to say it, I'm knocking on wood because this could be an awful prediction that actually comes right. The Alpine fault ruptures. There we go. We're already counting. It's 4 years over.
Okay, all right.
Final word, David. What will we not care about in 2021?
The government's NZ COVID tracer app is useless.
I think, and I fingers crossed, no one will care about Billy TK or Jamie Lee Ross. And I think that's something we can all share and agree on. That's it for 2020. We might see you back 2021. Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.